Rabbi, I've been thinking, in our country, in the U.S., and even throughout Europe, especially after listening to that brilliant State of the Union address we had, a couple weeks ago, we've kind of become a country of this. Let's just back up a little. You go to the State of the Union address. What I heard was this: you have a right to a home. You have a right to a living wage. You have a right to health care. You have a right to college. You pretty much have a right to everything. And it's
You're right.
Oh, very good. That was good. That was a good one, Rabbi.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's like, and I'm thinking, wow, this is an amazing turn the country's had. I mean, I guess we've been going this way for a while, but it seems that we really do. We have a right to everything. We have a right to college now, and it makes sense. That it sounds like a great utopian society. Why should we? It'd be great if we all can go to college for free. If we all have a job, we all have everything like that. I think it's an awesome situation. I like it. The problem is that the rights that we seem to get here in this country and in Europe as well seem to take away the rights from other people who have to pay for it. Like, yes, you have a right to an Obama phone, to a cell phone, but that means I have the right to take out of my salary the money I make to pay for yours, because you're not going to buy it, because someone's got to pay for it. So that kind of disturbed me a little bit. So in preparation for this show, and I really dug down deep. So in the 5 minutes of preparation I did for this show, I Googled the Bill of Rights, and I Googled the Constitution. I figured that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
Right behind us, the Bill of Rights here.
Right.
And I searched.
How many rights are there in the Bill of Rights?
A whole bunch.
Yeah, right.
14, 12, then?
I thought it was 13, but anyway, I'm not sure.
Well, there's an extra one.
Yeah, maybe there have been more rights have come up with.
Well, there's a whole bunch more now.
Right.
But I read them, and there are definitely we have rights in this country. We have an inalienable right to our freedom, pretty much, to pursue happiness. If you add the Constitution in, we have the right to bear arms, the right to remain silent and get a lawyer when we get arrested. There are some good rights.
And you have the rights to have them redo your rights.
Yes, you do, and you can keep redoing it.
Right.
But I did notice on most of them that they are not the kind of rights that take away from other people. They're the ones that are guaranteed us. It doesn't say anywhere about the right for your phone in college. It's great to have it, but it doesn't say that. So what I then did in my massive research is, since this is the Jeff and the Rabbi show, I went to the Torah. I looked up there, and I went from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. I got tired there. I stopped because the rest of it's kind of boring anyway. So I stopped right there.
All the rights are in numbers.
I couldn't get that far, but by the time I got through Leviticus, I saw some rights as well. I mean, and it's rights or obligations. We have a right to we have to take care of the orphans, the widows, the strangers. We have to do things in our towns. So people do have rights, but again,
that's the issue.
Well, but again,
that's the
issue. But I never saw, and I did search in those 3 chapters there. I never saw anywhere that if you go to prison, that you have the right to have to surgically remove part of your body so you look better in a pleated skirt, and we have to pay for it. I didn't see that. The sex change operation thing, but I didn't see that there.
Right.
It might be there in numbers because I didn't get the numbers.
Right.
So my question is to you, being the
authority. It wasn't even in Leviticus as far as I get. There's 2 steps. There's really 2 main points here. Number 1, rights.
Right.
I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know that the Torah gives anyone any rights to anything. What the Torah does do, for example, the Torah requires everyone to help the widow and the orphan.
Right.
The Torah does not give the widow and the orphan the right to be helped, to receive help. Torah doesn't do that. They don't get any rights to get help. And as a matter of fact, the Torah no one can demand anything. They can't demand help. They can only receive it.
So what you're saying is the Torah is really granting any rights. There are some obligations in there,
right?
But there are no rights.
Right. And the Torah says, for example, in this week's Torah portion, a lot of details in this week's Torah portion about civil law. A lot of details. If I go out and I dig a hole in the street, and if the hole is a certain amount deep, someone falls in there, or a loaded animal falls in there, I have to pay. Less than that, I don't have to pay. But the Torah never says that he has a right to compensation. Even the phraseology, even just framing it like that. Okay, let's say I throw rocks through your window. The Torah says I have to pay. And the Torah doesn't say you have a right to compensation. Even framing it like that changes the whole discourse, because once you have a right to anything, then you have a right to more things, or you want more things.
Right.
And therefore, pretty soon, what you feel is that I have a right to be protected and shielded from any harm that comes my way that was not my own. Matter of fact, then you're going to take another step and you're going to say, I have a right to be shielded from any harm, even if it was of my own making, because the whole purpose is not for me not to suffer. And that's not where the Torah is going. We don't find it anywhere.
Well, that's interesting, since most democracies got their base and their origin from the Torah to begin with, since somebody must have perverted something here down the way, because I thought you have a right to health care. So even if you go out and you smoke 10 packs of cigarettes a day and you get sick, you have a right to health care, but you don't in the Torah, you're saying.
I mean, let's not even, we don't have to get stretch it into specifics. We can say in a very simple question, we can say, I have a right, I am a widow or an orphan. The widow and the orphan needs to be protected. Widow and the orphan need to be protected. I have an obligation to protect the widow and the orphan. Never, however, does the orphan say, you have an obligation, I have a right to be cared for. And because of that, it keeps everything in a certain balance. It keeps the relationship between the giver and the recipient in a certain relationship that maintains. And you can't really presume to start to take the next step. Well, if I have a right to this, then they have a right to that. And we don't talk about rights. We talk about obligations.
Well, I think you just hit on the main point of the kind of society that we are building out. We intentionally do just the opposite, because it is more than your obligation. You see the people out marching around McDonald's, I demand $15 an hour, I demand $15 an hour. We, for some reason now, want to live in a society where we say, you owe me. It is my right. You owe me a phone, because you have a phone. You owe me this, and I don't want to pay for it. You've made a lot of money. You've been successful. You owe me this.
Right.
But that is what we've decided. I mean, obviously, in Europe, even is probably a couple steps further than in America, they riot. They riot if all of a sudden they say, wait a minute, that free college education, we might have to charge you a little bit more for it. They riot. They throw things through windows.
Look at Greece. Look at Greece.
I mean,
we're not putting up with this. No austerity.
It's my right to have this. What are you going to have austerity for? Right. But it seems like it's not a mistake, because the Torah sounds a little bit more intelligent than this thing, but it doesn't seem like this is a mistake. That's what we want now.
So here's where what happened. This historical understanding of how that switch came about. Once upon a time, people were obligated. And you had a hierarchy. But people had obligations. Even the king was supposedly obligated to be benevolent and to take care of his subjects. However, there was a lot of abuse. A lot of times those people on the upside didn't really live up to their obligations to the people who were on the downside. So therefore, along came John Locke and people like him and said, let's switch this around. Forget about you being obligated. We have rights, and I can demand my rights. And you have to give me this, and you have to do that for me. As a matter of fact, even you, the president, king, whatever you are, you only are serving at the consent of the governed. In other words, he turned everything back to the individual as the recipient. The Torah turns everything to the individual also, but as the giver. So when in a Torah life, I spend so much time dealing with my obligations that I don't even have time to be demanding my rights, which the Torah doesn't give me. I just know I have obligations. If I'm poor, guess what? I have an obligation to give money to the poor.
Which is an amazing situation.
Right? Even the poor have an obligation to give money to the poor. No one is ever exempted, because the Torah said you have to help the poor. Well, if I'm poor, I have to help the poor too.
So you're saying in our country, let's say, where 50% of the people don't pay any of the bill. Don't pay a dime of the bill from the federal government, and 50% do. And in fact, actually, the top 20% pay 94% of the bill. That's not what the Torah meant then, because everybody has an obligation.
The Torah meant that people have to live up to obligations. And yeah, it probably will always be true that the top strata of society is going to be picking up most of the bills. Right. They do have most of the money, and therefore just practically they're going to be picking up most of the bills. Even if everyone had to give like 10%,
Right.
okay,
Right.
but when you add up the 10% of the top strata, it's going to overweigh the 10%
But that's still
from
fair, and that
right.
makes sense.
Right. But the bottom line is everybody is still focused on what they have to do. And that means two things happen. Number one is I never identify myself as the recipient, as the one, there's no, like, you don't have a society where there's victim and victimizer. Because everyone is giving. No matter how poor you are, you give a little something to the next person. That's one thing. That's one very, very important role. And the other is that everyone is always focused on their obligations. So even the poor man is a rich man to a certain extent. Everybody, there's richer and richer and richer, but everybody is looking at their obligations. And wealthy people, so they feel that they have greater obligations. But the framework is entirely obligation. And it's not, now this is because there's one other thing that's on top of all that. On top of the whole system lies God, who's beneficent and gave everyone what they had. So God has the right to say, I gave you X, and I gave you X minus 10. So he's got X, but you've got X minus 10. So you know what? This is how much I'm expecting from you, and this is how much I'm expecting from you, but I have a right to expect because I gave it. What happens really is, and here's where the problem comes in, when the wealthy man feels, I'm wealthy because I got there myself,
Right.
okay, and the wealthy man thinks about the poor man, and he's not wealthy because he's a loser, because he didn't do all the smart things that I did. And then you get in this resentment, and the resentment is, well, no, the only reason you got there is because your father was rich enough to give you this and that. My father wasn't. And then you get all that resentment. The only way to step out of this whole thing, that's class warfare. The only way to step out of class warfare is to enforce upon everyone their obligations. And that's every law in the Torah talks about obligations. Matter of fact, I'll even tell you, it's so interesting. The Torah doesn't say that if your animal gores another person's animal, you have to, the Torah doesn't even say that you are obligated to muzzle your animal or watch him or anything like that. All the Torah says is that A's animal gores B, A has to pay. Why does A have to pay? Because he didn't muzzle his animal. The Torah didn't even have a law that you have to muzzle your animal. Just figure it all backwards. Well, if you got to pay, must mean you were supposed to muzzle. And you know what? Everyone will catch on real quick. If you have to pay, you'll figure out next time you'll muzzle the animal.
Doesn't A get to eat B's animal, though, too? I thought that was part of the deal, though. He gets to eat the animal, right?
Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, what is the disposition of the dead animal? And if they can sell it, make some money off it, and who gets it not. And it's actually true, as a matter of fact. What usually happens is since A pays B, A does get the carcass. A does get the carcass, gets to do something with it for whatever it's worth.
But this sounds like, a logic. God seems to have invented a kind of a logical system that makes sense. And I think the most important part about his logical system, not just that it works, but people, I think, remain better people. I think they become better part of society. And I think especially when you understand that the rich man got his money because God decided to give the rich man his money. The poor man got the less money because God decided to give him the money. I think you create a better society. What happens to society, if you don't watch the news and you don't know, what happens to society when you go by this new system? If I have a right, you're not giving me a big enough wage, I'm going to protest. You're not, it's not fair. The 1%ers have all the money, so, give us more, take from them, give to me. Not just, I think the society is unjust and it doesn't work. What happens to the people in society?
Well, practically, what happens every single time this happens, because this is not the first time this has ever come up. And what will happen is ultimately someone will come along, there'll be an upheaval in society, and they'll take all the money away from all the wealthy people to distribute it amongst the poor people. And for some reason or another, amazingly enough, it will end up concentrated in the hands of another group of formerly poor but now wealthy people.
So if you go to 1917, probably this happened exactly the same way.
Right, there you go. Right, so you can, all the whites are out and all the reds are in. Okay, great. But as far as everyone else goes, what does it matter if 90% of the wealth is owned by whites or 90% of wealth is owned by reds? It really doesn't matter to any of us. This is the way. I would posit that today it's more equitable than it's ever been in the history of mankind.
Today it's more
Today
equitable.
it is. Because today they said that 50% of the wealth is concentrated in this, whatever it is, 5-10% of the people. I would bet you that historically it's more like 95% of the wealth is concentrated in that same 5% of the people. I think that we are living in the most equitably distributed capital society. The capital is most equitably distributed in all of history.
But the people seem to be complaining more now.
Right.
And I think it's because you've changed the perception of people by demanding more and by wanting, well, I want more.
Right.
Free college, we're not going to give free college.
Right. So that's the
right?
deal. You see, once you have a right, that means like you can't do that to me. So when I have there's certain basic rights, certain unalienable rights, and amongst them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So those are kind of like basic things. Well, my liberty and my pursuit of happiness and all those type of things. So that starts to get more and more narrowly defined.
You got to have a big screen TV to be happy.
And everyone, right, and it's just not right, And I remember hearing a guy who was on strike, and he was saying that, he was on strike, and he was an auto worker. This is like years and years ago. Says, my daughter deserves a new pair of skates for Xmas.
That's true.
I understand you'd like to give your daughter a new pair of skates, but why does she deserve them? Why does she deserve them? Because she's a kid, and the other person is a kid. The other person got skates. My daughter deserves skates. Why? Because all people are created equal. And therefore, it starts to get really fuzzy, especially when we're talking about rights. Then we're all equal. We have equal rights. So then the next step is we have equal access to all material goods.
So you're saying people shouldn't have equal access to health care? Are you saying because I maybe make more money, my health care should be better than that person over there that doesn't make as much money? Is that fair?
That's the whole question in and of itself. Like, how did the state become defined as the one that determines health care? Right? How does that work out?
I don't recall when that happened
right.
in our country, but yeah.
Right. So, is everyone entitled to have the same diet?
Well, yeah. I mean, listen, I remember that that brilliant woman, Sandra Fluke, she said everyone has the right for all of us to pay for her birth control. Isn't that probably, that should be her right, or should it not be? Should every woman not have that right?
Right. So, again, like I said, it only makes sense. It really makes sense. I'm not blaming these people, because once you posit rights of any way, shape, and form, it'll just keep going and going and going. So the Torah, therefore, never ever mentions that anyone has a right to anything. On the other hand, the Torah does mention obligations. All the obligations.
Okay, and I agree with that, and I read that, but then the problem is, and you have in any society, if they just were basing their decisions and everything on the Torah, what if the guy doesn't meet his obligations to give tzedakah or to take care of people?
That's right. All kinds of things. So then you have recourse. Then you do have recourse to say that he is obligated. I deposited an item with him. That's another talk in this week's Torah portion. I deposited an item with him, and he now will not return it to me. He claims that he never got it. Now, he's obligated, whatever he's obligated. If he's obligated to take an oath, then I take him to court, and I demand that he take that oath. Maybe he's guilty, and maybe he has to pay. Whatever it is, I can demand that. But the Torah never says that that's my right. The Torah just says that's what his obligation is, and that's what the court is there to do.
But doesn't the Torah say, and I don't know if it describes it as a right, but it almost is, that if a poor man in collateral loans you gives you his garment as collateral, you have to give it back to him by the end of the night because he's got nothing to sleep.
Right. Again, the Torah doesn't say that the poor man can demand.
Right.
The Torah says that you must take it out. As a matter of fact, he's got to stand outside. The poor man does not have the right to go into the house and demand it.
But he has the right to go to the Beth Din or the
He
court.
can
and demand it.
he can go demand it. The Torah tells us that the wealthy man or the lender has the obligation to return it. It's just the phraseology. As soon as you bring out that one word right, then there's no way to contain it, and it runs on and on and on and on. Those are my rights. I have a right for you not to do this to me. And in truth, this underlies much of the marital discord and problems that we have in families. We have marital discord because people think that they deserve certain things from their spouse. And we have familial discord because children demand and expect certain things from their parents. And if they don't get them, they think that they're bad parents because they're not giving them to me.
I learned long ago I don't have a right to anything from my spouse. I've learned that a long time ago. But okay. But let me ask you this thing, because it is, and I agree with you, it's a great system. But are you telling me then a country could be run by obligations alone? In other words, no taxes, but we're obligated because we got to give 10% of our, God says you got to give 10% of the money that you earn to help the poor. Now, whether the government collects it, if you're helping this type of person or that type of person. We don't have a right to a minimum wage, but God says you have to treat people fairly.
That's right.
So, with human nature, could that work?
Right. I think it works great. The
Torah
says that the Torah doesn't give anyone the right to severance, but the Torah does guarantee that when the owner sets his slave free, he has to send him with the whole package. But it's not that the slave can demand the package. The owner is obligated to give the package. It's all in the terminology because the Torah wants to keep everything flowing from me out by way of me understanding what my obligations are.
So you think, though, that just in a realistic approach, you think if I have a business or I'm a farmer, I'm going to leave the corners of my field unpicked. But if I make television sets, I'm going to leave some television sets in the corner. And they think a society can work that way. I'm just going to leave some television sets out on the street because we didn't need them all. I just took the main ones. Can society run that way?
Society could run that way, actually, if the people who are obligated are fulfilling their obligations. They can actually start to feel humbled by the fact that they were able to fulfill their obligations.
I understand that.
But when you are satisfying someone else's right for some reason, you don't walk away feeling good about it. As a matter of fact, what generally you hear is, hey, what about my rights? I have a right. I worked hard for this money. I have a right to it, and so on and so forth. All you get is in a rights battle. And like when you get in a rights battle between like a husband and wife, and I've got my rights, and he says he's got his rights, and she says she's got her rights, and it goes back. It can't last. It's not going to last.
No, I agree, and I agree with everything you're saying. It's an interesting concept that maybe some people in our government at least should probably listen to a little bit. Maybe things would work a little bit better if we had a country of obligations instead of a country of rights.
And I think this week's Torah portion is really it's like Leviticus starts around Exodus starts around chapter 21, and you read all the obligations that people had, when they're obligated to pay, when they're obligated to compensate, when they're obligated to pay half, when they're obligated to pay whole, and on and on and on and on. The whole parsha all talks about obligations, and it's the setting. It is the setting. You can't say, like people say, well, doesn't the Torah say that the rich are supposed to help the poor? So of course, you should give welfare and all that type of stuff. Yeah, but the Torah says the rich are obligated. The Torah doesn't say the poor have a right, and that changes the entire dynamic.
Wow. I can just imagine that State of the Union speech if it was, yeah, I know you're poor, but you're obligated to do this. I mean, I just can imagine that speech.
Yeah.
I don't know if it would have gone over as well. I don't know if it went over that well anyway, but I think it would have gone over a little less well for a lot of the people that vote in this country.
Right.
I think the Torah is a great thing, but I don't know if Torah could win many elections. I just don't know. If you're not promising people stuff and you're not demanding your rights, I don't know how you win elections.
Right. I think that the one thing, and I would have to say for our society, this American country that we live in, I think by and large it is doing a better job at this than any other previous century
No doubt.
in the history of man. Previously, if poor people had something, and the poor guy's living in a certain place, and the rich guy decides he wants to live there, he just shoos him away. The Tsar just boots him out, or Caesar kicks him out, or whoever it is.
No doubt.
You know, goodbye. Pack up your stuff and go somewhere else, poor man. You know, and in our society, there are so many guarantees that people cannot be taken advantage of, and due to their poverty. It's a wonderful, wonderful society with tremendous, tremendous safeguards, more so, I believe, than any time in all of history. And I think the safeguards are good. The safeguards are good because by common consent, we do not want to take advantage. The Torah tells us we're not allowed to take advantage of poor people, right? We're not allowed to take advantage of anyone, but certainly not of poor people. At the same time, the Torah inculcates us with our obligations to this very same poor people.
Well, no, I like it. Obligation. We would live in a better, happier society if we all fulfilled our obligations and nobody demanded their rights.
Bill of obligations.
That makes more sense.
Right?
All right.
Wonder what that big O would look like in
Yeah,
the
that's
Gothic
true.
O there.
I don't know, but it would be a better plan.
Yeah.
I think God thought this one out a little better than our founding fathers. All right, we'll see you next week on another great episode of Jeff and the Rabbi.